Daniel Okafor was 43 years old when he decided to speak. Not in a courtroom. Not in a lawyer's office. Not across a conference table with documents arranged in stacks and opposing counsel adjusting their posture. He spoke in his own kitchen at 7:22 in the morning, while his wife stood at the marble island she had selected, in the house she had redesigned, explaining with the patient condescension of someone addressing a person who had already been processed and filed, that she would be keeping the house, the accounts, the investment portfolio, and the 3 properties they had purchased together during the 11 years of their marriage, because she had spoken to an attorney who had explained that in Georgia, marital assets were divided equitably, and her contribution to this marriage, her income, her visibility, her social architecture, vastly outweighed his. She had been speaking for 4 minutes. Daniel had listened the way he listened to everything. Completely, without interruption, without visible reaction, filing each sentence where it belonged. Then he said, "Vanessa, I think you should call your attorney back. There are some things he doesn't know." He said it quietly. He said it without anger, and without theater, and without looking away from the coffee he was pouring. He said it the way a structural engineer points to the load-bearing wall before the renovation crew gets to work, not unkindly, but with the precise neutrality of someone who already knows what the wall is doing. What she didn't know was that Daniel had been quietly building a legal and financial position for 2 years that would make her attorney's strategy the most expensive miscalculation of her professional life. What he set in motion over the next 90 days, Vanessa would spend the rest of a very long year trying to understand. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The alarm went off at 5:08 a.m., and Daniel was already dressed. He had been up since 4:30, working at the desk in the small study at the back of the house, the room Vanessa had never redecorated because she had decided early in the marriage that it was his room, and had extended to it the same disinterest she extended to most things that were his. The shelves along the north wall held engineering textbooks, 2 decades of project folders organized by year, and a row of composition notebooks in which Daniel had kept a professional diary since age 27, when his first mentor told him that the most important thing an engineer could do was document his own thinking in real time. Because memory was reconstruction, and reconstruction was error. The desk was a folding table. The chair was a second-hand office chair with a slow leak in the hydraulic cylinder that dropped him imperceptibly through the course of a long work session. He had been meaning to replace it for 3 years. He had not. There were other priorities. On the screen in front of him was the structural analysis for a mixed-use development in Cobb County, 12 stories, ground floor retail, residential above. A foundation situation that the project architect had flagged as unusual, and that Daniel had been reviewing for the past 4 days, because unusual foundation situations were the kind of thing you looked at until you understood them completely. He was 2/3 through the analysis. He marked his place, closed the laptop, and went downstairs. The kitchen was dark. He turned on the light above the stove, not the overhead, which Vanessa preferred off in the mornings, and filled his thermos with coffee from the machine he had programmed the night before. He made breakfast for his daughter Adaisy, who was 12 and ate the same thing every morning: 2 eggs scrambled soft, wheat toast, a glass of orange juice, and a small cup of yogurt that she ate last. The way she ate things she liked best. He had made this breakfast without being asked since she was 8 years old. He would make it, he calculated, for approximately 4 more years, until the particular geometry of a teenager's morning schedule made this kind of help feel like interference. He was trying to be present for every morning that remained. He was sliding the eggs onto the plate when Adaisy came down, already in her school uniform, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her composition notebook for science class in her hand. She looked at the plate, then at him, then at the clock on the microwave. "You're up early," she said. "Foundation problem in Cobb County." She pulled out the stool and sat. "Did you figure it out?" "Getting there." She opened the science notebook and studied it while she ate, turning pages with one hand and using the fork with the other. And Daniel cleaned the pan and set it to dry, and stood for a moment watching her the way he sometimes allowed himself to. Not for long, not in a way that made a production of it, just long enough to register something he didn't want to let go past unnoticed. She had his mother's forehead. She had his patience. She had Vanessa's ability to move through a space as though it had been arranged for her, a quality that in his mother-in-law had always felt like entitlement, and in Adeze felt like a kind of natural confidence he hoped would carry her through every room she would ever need to walk into. "Mom's still asleep?" Adeze asked without looking up. "Far as I know." She turned a page. She was on the phone late. He dried his hands on the kitchen towel and hung it back on the oven handle the way it went. "She has a lot to manage," he said, and meant it, and left it there. He had met Vanessa Osei at a professional conference in Charlotte 11 years ago. She was 31, 4 years into a marketing and brand strategy career that was accelerating at the specific velocity of someone who had correctly identified what she was good at and had organized everything around it. She was magnetic in the way people are magnetic when they are genuinely competent, the confidence coming from the work itself rather than the performance of the work. He had been struck by that. He still thought about it sometimes. When he was trying to be fair, she was genuinely good at her work. That had been real. She had been drawn to him, she told him on their second date, because he was calm. He had laughed. She had not been joking. She said she had spent years surrounded by men who performed their confidence at full volume, and she found his quietness interesting. She found his stillness interesting. She found it different. He had taken this as a compliment. He had not yet understood that for Vanessa, different and lesser would over time become difficult to distinguish. They were married 14 months later. Adeze was born 2 years after that. Daniel had continued the work he had always done, structural engineering, eventually his own small firm, 3 employees, a consistent client roster of developers and architectural firms that had trusted him for years, because his calculations were clean and his documentation was thorough, and he had never, not once, signed off on a structural analysis that he had not verified himself. He made good money. Not spectacular money. Good, solid money. The kind that paid the mortgage and the school fees and the savings accounts and the retirement contributions and did not make a visible impression at dinner parties. The dinner parties were Vanessa's territory. She had a talent for them. She knew which restaurants were worth the conversation and which wines landed correctly and which combinations of guests created the particular frictions that made an evening memorable. She hosted with genuine skill, and Daniel attended with genuine support. And somewhere in the middle of year 4, he noticed that his presence at these events had become a logistical matter rather than a relational one. He was there because not being there would create a gap that required explanation. He was introduced and then released into the social ambient, and Vanessa moved through the room at the precise speed of someone who had somewhere more important to be. She had begun managing the household accounts in year 3, during a period when Daniel had 3 projects running simultaneously, and she had offered to take the administrative load. He had thanked her. She had managed them competently, which is to say that the bills were paid and the accounts were maintained, and Daniel had trusted the accounting with the same trust he had given to everything in the marriage, completely and without auditing. This had been, he would come to understand, the most important structural decision of the entire 11 years. Not because she had done anything wrong with the accounts, because he had not looked. The looking began in the 8th year of the marriage, and it began because of a number. He had been filing his taxes and needed a figure from the joint savings account, and he pulled the statement and glanced at the balance and felt, for the first time, a specific quality of confusion that had nothing to do with error. The balance was correct. The deposits were regular. The withdrawals made sense. But the account was also 8 years old, and the balance reflected 8 years of 2 professional incomes and careful living, and the math did not work. He sat with the statement for 20 minutes. He went back through the previous 12 months line by line. He went back through the 24 months before that. The debits were small. Individually, they were frequent, and they were to accounts he did not recognize. And when he looked up those accounts, he was an engineer, he looked things up. They were savings accounts held in Vanessa's name alone. Not joint accounts. Accounts that predated their marriage and that had been receiving consistent transfers, averaging $2,400 per month for the full 8 years he could document. He sat in the study with the folding chair descending slowly beneath him and looked at those numbers for a long time. He did not confront her. He was not, by nature, a person who acted before he understood what he was looking at. He put the statement away, completed his taxes using the figure he needed, and over the following 3 months, methodically obtained copies of every joint account statement for the full 8 years of the marriage. He organized them in a new folder. He ran the transfers through a spreadsheet. The total transferred across 8 years into accounts held solely in Vanessa's name was $231,400. He looked at that number for a long time, too. Then he put the folder in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet in the study, behind a set of project folders from 2017, and he thought about what it meant. Not the amount. He had understood the amount. He thought about the structure of it, the consistency, the small denominations, the fact that she had not hidden it. Exactly, because the transfers were visible in the joint account if you looked, but had placed them in a context where looking was unlikely. The administrative complexity of a household managed by one person, the implicit trust of a long marriage, the particular blind spot created by a man who was busy and trusting, and who had perhaps never fully understood what his quietness communicated to the person who lived beside it. He thought about what a man like him was supposed to do with this, and he decided to wait, and to watch, and to understand the full shape of the thing before he did anything about it. He waited 3 more years. In the 9th year, Vanessa began working closely with a partner at a brand strategy firm, a man named Callum Marsh, who had built a regional reputation and who was, by most assessments of the people who worked with him, brilliant at the particular thing he did. Daniel met him twice, once at a firm event and once at a dinner party Vanessa hosted. Callum was tall, articulate, and possessed of the specific social ease of someone who had always been in rooms where his value was understood before he walked in. He spoke to Daniel pleasantly, at moderate length about structural engineering, which he found interesting in the way educated people find fields they know nothing about interesting, genuinely, but briefly. Then the conversation moved. Daniel watched Vanessa watch Callum from across the room with an attention she did not modulate. He noted it and filed it and said nothing. In the 10th year, the business trips became more frequent. He did not track them. He made a Daisy's breakfast and drove her to school and worked on his projects and was home for dinner on most nights and said nothing about the trips because he had been watching the shape of the thing, not the symptoms. The night he almost did something was in February of that year. He had come home from a client site to find the house empty, a Daisy at a sleepover, Vanessa on a work trip, a note on the kitchen counter. He had made himself dinner and sat at the island, and for the first time since finding the account statements 2 years earlier, he felt the full weight of what he had been carrying, the way you feel, the weight of something, only when you set it down. He sat there for an hour. He thought about Daisy's science notebook. He thought about the shoebox she kept things in, which he had not seen but whose existence he was somehow certain of. He thought about the folding chair. He did not call anyone. He ate his dinner, washed the dishes, and went to the study and worked until 1 a.m. on the Cobb County Foundation. Then he went to bed. In year 11, he called an attorney. James Achebe had been practicing family law in Atlanta for 27 years. He had graduated from Morehouse and then Emory Law, and had spent the first 8 years of his career learning how wealth moved through marriages at the firm level before going independent and building his own practice around the specific intelligence that work had given him. His reputation was not loud. It was the reputation of a man who had won a large number of cases in which the opposing party had initially believed the outcome was already decided. He was the attorney that other attorneys mentioned when they were being honest. The first meeting lasted 2 hours. Daniel brought 3 things: the organized account statements, the spreadsheet, and the prenuptial agreement he and Vanessa had signed before the marriage. An agreement that Vanessa's attorney had drawn up, not his, because Vanessa had had existing savings and assets she wanted to protect, and the agreement had been structured, at her attorney's direction, to protect each party's separately held assets. Daniel had signed it because it had seemed reasonable, and because he had not, at 29 years old, had any particular assets to protect. By 43, he did. Achebe read the prenuptial agreement first. He read the account statements. He looked at the spreadsheet. Then he asked Daniel to describe his firm's current structure and asset composition. Daniel did. Achebe listened with the complete attention of a man who billed for his time and understood the value of not wasting his own. When Daniel finished, Achebe was quiet for a moment. The $231,400 in transfers is documented? Fully, and your firm's equity, all of it, is held in a separate entity you founded 6 years before the marriage? Yes. Okafor Structural Group, capitalized from savings I accumulated in my 20s, all predating the marriage by 6 years. Every patent, every contract, every client relationship held in the entity. Achebe looked at the prenuptial agreement again. He looked at it for 45 seconds. Then he set it down. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want a clean exit," Daniel said. "No drama, no spectacle. I want what's fair, and I want to stop watching something I can see clearly and saying nothing about it." Achebe nodded the way a man nods when he has just confirmed that a situation which looked complicated is not. "I'm going to need you to be patient for a few more months," he said. "There are some things I'd like to document before we move." Daniel said he understood patience. He went home that evening and made Daisy's homework snack, apple slices and peanut butter, which was the homework snack, not the dinner snack, a distinction she took seriously, and sat at the kitchen island while she worked through a geometry problem that was not particularly difficult, but that she was approaching with the methodical care of someone who understood that the work deserved the attention. He watched her correct an error, erase cleanly, redo the calculation, check it against the original problem, and then move to the next problem. He sat with his coffee and said nothing, and felt something he could only describe to himself as recognition. She got up to get water, and on her way back she stopped and looked at him in the specific way she looked at him when she had noticed something she was deciding whether to say. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yes." She studied him for another second. "Then, you look like you're thinking about something." "Foundation problem," he said. She accepted this because it was true often enough to be plausible. She sat back down and returned to geometry, and Daniel drank his coffee and looked at the kitchen tile he had selected over Vanessa's preference for a different pattern. A fact he remembered now with the particular clarity of small things that survive. Achebe's additional documentation took 4 months. A forensic accountant named Patricia Wu, who worked with Achebe on complex marital asset cases, and who moved through financial records with the same pleasure a good engineer took from reading a clean structural drawing, was brought in to prepare a complete analysis of the transfers. She cross-referenced them with joint account deposits, identified the timing patterns, flagged 3 additional smaller accounts that had not appeared in Daniel's original analysis, and revised the total to $247,800 over 11 years. She also identified, in the second month, a loan Vanessa had taken against the joint home equity line, $85,000, applied for in Vanessa's name through a provision of the line that allowed individual access, transferred to one of the sole account deposits within 48 hours. This was documented in a separate exhibit. Achebe, reviewing it, made a note on his legal pad and said, "This is the clearest instance of dissipation in the marital estate I have seen in 4 years." He said it without visible emotion, which was how Patricia Wu had delivered it, which was how Daniel had learned to deliver things that were important, without emotion. Because emotion was information that belonged to him and not to the accounting. Callum Marsh, in the 10th month of year 11, began appearing in Vanessa's schedule with the regularity of something that had decided to stop being discreet. He was referenced in conversations she had on the phone in the hallway, with the specific ease of someone who has concluded that the other person in the house is not paying attention. She began mentioning his views on things, restaurants, travel, business strategy, in ways that arrived at the dinner table, as though from a neutral source, and were not. She mentioned once, to her sister on the phone while Daniel was in the next room, that Callum believed she deserved a different life. She said it with the satisfaction of someone who had just received a verdict they had been waiting for. Daniel heard it and noted it, and went back to his reading. The conversation she had with her attorney, the one that preceded the morning in the kitchen, had been, Achebe told Daniel afterward, a fairly standard preliminary consultation. Vanessa had described the marriage's assets, the house, the joint accounts, the investment portfolio, the 3 properties. She had described the marriage's dynamics, her career contributions, her social and professional visibility, her income over 11 years. She had not mentioned the prenuptial agreement. Not because she had forgotten it, Achebe suspected, but because she had not thought it relevant, because the assets she was describing were marital assets, and the prenuptial agreement had been, in her accounting, about the premarital savings she had brought in, which had long since been integrated into their shared life. She had not thought carefully about what it protected on the other side of the ledger, because she had not thought there was anything worth protecting on the other side of the ledger. Her attorney had advised her to file. She had filed the next morning. The morning after that was the morning in the kitchen. Daniel poured his coffee. He listened to 4 minutes of the plan as she had understood it. Then he said what he said. He said it without anger, without any particular emphasis, just the neutral precision of a man identifying a load-bearing wall before the renovation crew gets to work. She looked at him. "What doesn't he know?" she asked. "There's a prenuptial agreement," he said. "Your attorney drew it up. I signed it in March of 2013. I'd like you to call him and make sure he's reviewed it before you take the next step." She was still for a moment. "The prenup was about my accounts, my savings before the marriage. It was about both parties' separately held assets," he said. "That's the language your attorney used. I'd like you to call him and review the language." He picked up his thermos, He picked up his work bag from the hook by the door, which was a worn canvas briefcase he had been using for 8 years and had declined to replace on the grounds that it still worked. He looked at her once more with the same even expression. "I'm not trying to be difficult," he said. "I want this to be clean. Call your attorney." He drove to work. The phone call between the attorneys happened at 10:30 that morning. Achebe described it to Daniel at 11:15. Her attorney had pulled the prenup, reviewed it, and understood immediately what he was looking at. Okafor Structural Group. Founded 2007, 6 years before the marriage. Capitalized from premarital savings. All firm equity, all intellectual property, all client contracts held within the entity. Separately held under the prenup's language, which her own attorney had written. Current firm value, per the most recent valuation Achebe had commissioned, $4.2 million. Her attorney had asked Achebe whether there was anything else. Achebe had said there was an additional matter, a forensic accounting analysis of certain transfers from the marital estate over the course of the marriage. He had described the analysis in summary, without the exhibits. Her attorney had been quiet for a period Achebe described as significant. Then he had said that he would need to speak with his client and would call back. He called back at 2:00 p.m. and asked for a settlement meeting. The meeting was held in Achebe's conference room on a Tuesday. Vanessa came with her attorney and a composed stillness that Daniel recognized as performance. Not dishonest performance, but the kind of performance you construct when you have been surprised and need to look as though you haven't been. She looked at Daniel when she walked in. He looked back at her. There was a moment between them that lasted no longer than a second and held everything the next 2 hours would say. Achebe opened with the prenuptial agreement, clause by clause, with the methodical thoroughness of a man who understood that the most important thing in a conference room was never to rush past anything that needed to land. He walked through the founding documentation for Okafor Structural Group, the capitalization history, the patent filings, the entity's clear separation from the marital estate under the prenup's explicit terms. Vanessa's attorney asked the questions he needed to ask. They were good questions. They were answered with exhibits. Then, Patricia Wu's report. The transfers, $247,800 over 11 years, documented transaction by transaction, timed and sourced. The home equity loan, $85,000, dispersed into a sole account within 48 hours, characterized as dissipation of the marital estate. Vanessa's attorney looked at the report without speaking for a period that communicated something. He asked 2 questions, both of which he already knew the answers to. He was a professional. He was doing his job. The job did not have much left to work with. The settlement terms that emerged were these: Vanessa's separate premarital savings, fully protected under the prenup, remained hers, approximately $180,000. The marital house would be sold and proceeds split equitably, minus a credit to Daniel's share in the amount of the forensic accountant's documented dissipation total. The joint investment portfolio was divided equally. The 3 properties, purchased jointly, were evaluated individually. 2 were sold and proceeds split. 1 transferred to Daniel's name to offset the dissipation balance. Okafor Structural Group, the firm, the equity, the clients, the 20 years of work, remained entirely his. All of it. The prenup's language was, as Achebe had said when they first met, very clear. Vanessa's attorney leaned across to her at one point and spoke quietly. She listened. Then she looked at the table for a moment, and then she looked at Daniel. It was a different look than the one she had given him that morning in the kitchen, or the one she had given him at dinner parties, or the one she had given him at any point in 11 years. It was the look of someone who has just read the full extent of a document they had been skimming for a decade. When the terms were finalized and the attorneys were reviewing the settlement draft, Daniel said what he had decided to say. He had written it in his composition notebook the night before. Not because he needed to read from it, but because writing something down was how he knew whether he meant it. "I spent 11 years being quiet," he said. He was looking at Vanessa, not at the attorneys, not at the documents. His voice was the same voice he used in every room. "Not because I had nothing to say. Because I believed that if I did good work and showed up for our family and kept building something real, the evidence would eventually speak for itself. I was wrong about that. Evidence doesn't speak for itself. You have to speak for it." He paused. "I also should have spoken sooner. About the accounts, about what I could see. That was my failure too." He said it without self-pity and without invitation for response. "I'm not angry. I want you to know that. But I needed you to understand what was here the whole time, what you were looking at the whole time." He stood. He collected the settlement copy, placed it in the worn canvas briefcase, and straightened his jacket. He thanked Akabe. He shook Patricia Wu's hand. He walked out without theater, without looking back at the room, and rode the elevator down 31 floors to the lobby, and walked out into the midday Atlanta heat and stood for a moment on the sidewalk with his briefcase at his side and the city going about its Tuesday around him. Then he called his mother. Ruth Okafor answered before the second ring, because she had been answering before the second ring for 43 years whenever it was him. "It's done," he said. She was quiet the way she was always quiet when something large had become a fact. She let it settle. Then, "Are you all right?" "Yes," he said, and meant it, and understood that he meant it. "And a Daisy?" "She's at school. I'm picking her up at 3. A pause. Then his mother said, "Your father used to say that a quiet man is not a still pond. He said a quiet man is a river that chose not to flood." She let that sit. "I always thought that was about him. I think he meant it about you. He said he would call her this weekend. He said he loved her." He got in the car. The shape of what followed was not dramatic. It was the shape of things returning to what they had always been when the performance around them was cleared away. Vanessa received her settlement, the premarital savings intact, her equitable share of the sold house and investment portfolio, a number that was real money and was not what she had understood she was filing for. She moved into an apartment in the city. She continued her work at the firm. She and Callum Marsh had a period together that lasted a specific number of months and then did not, for reasons that were not described publicly, but that her sister understood clearly enough from the 2 conversations they had about it. He had imagined a different financial circumstance. He was not dishonest about this. He simply became less available as the circumstance clarified itself, which was its own kind of honesty. She never asked Daniel about it, and he would not have told her anything that was not his to say. He moved into a craftsman house 20 minutes from a Daisy's school. It was older than he needed, and in better structural condition than it appeared, which had been the primary requirement. He spent 3 weekends on the plumbing, 2 on the electrical, and 1 full week of evenings resetting the foundation supports in the northeast corner, where 40 years of soil shift had begun to do what soil does without proper attention. He did this himself because he had assessed the work, and it was work he understood how to do, and because there is a particular satisfaction in putting your hands on the problem and correcting it directly, without intermediary. He refinished the floors. He built a Daisy's bedroom shelves to her specifications, floor to ceiling but with the bottom ones at desk height, so I can reach them without a step stool, and installed them level on the first attempt. He built a reading chair for the front room from a woodworking plan he had kept in a folder for 6 years, waiting until he had the right space for it. The chair was finished in November and was exactly right. Adeze spent alternate weeks with him. On her weeks, the breakfast was the same: 2 eggs scrambled soft, wheat toast, orange juice, yogurt eaten last. The notes continued, folded small, tucked under the apple. He did not know if she still kept them. He did not ask. Some things did not need to be said to be understood. On a Thursday evening in the following spring, he came home from a site visit in Marietta, a commercial building whose foundation he had been called in to review after another engineer had flagged a discrepancy, and stood in the driveway for a moment after cutting the engine. The light through the front windows was the particular warm light of a house that had been thought about and worked on. The oak at the corner of the lot was coming into leaf. He had looked at that oak when he was deciding about the house and had thought, whoever planted that tree thought about where it would be in 50 years. This was the kind of thinking he respected. He sat with the engine off and listened to the tick of the cooling metal in the quiet. Then, he got out. He went inside. He hung his jacket and set his briefcase on the desk and went to the kitchen and began making dinner. The real one, not the quick one. Because Adeze was coming tomorrow, and he was making her favorite, and it needed time. He had been quiet for 11 years. He had spoken when it was time. He had done it without raising his voice, without cruelty, without theater. The work had always been there. The evidence had always been there. It had simply waited for him to decide it was time to show it to someone who needed to see it. He put the onions in the pan and listened to them start. Outside, the oak moved in the evening wind, the kitchen filled with smell and warmth, and the particular ordinary light of a life that had found its correct shape and been left to inhabit it. He did not look at what was behind him. There was nothing behind him that required him to look. That was how he did everything. That was always how he had done everything. And now, everyone knew it. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.